There are days that begin in peace and end in ashes. Remember that Tuesday morning? The sky was a perfect cloudless blue. The rhythm of life was as hurried as ever. No one knew they were living in the final hours of an old world. At 8:46 a.m., a crack appeared, and by 10:28, an entire era had crumbled. History has turning points written in blood and tears. September 11th is one of them. It is not just a story of falling towers, but of the rise of fear, courage, and a world on permanent alert. Tonight we will go beyond the familiar images to touch its intangible legacy. Do you dare to return with me to the moment the world held its breath? Subscribe to the channel, and together, let's seek the answer to the question: what have we learned from that rubble? The daytime stopped, 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time. It was a beautiful autumn morning in New York, the sky untouched by clouds, a gentle breeze carrying the last hints of summer. Millions were starting their day. Office workers rushing with coffee in hand, drivers stuck in traffic on the Brooklyn Bridge, children heading to school with heavy backpacks. New York City, the bustling heart of America, was waking up just like any other day. But then, a sound that did not belong here rang out. A deep, muffled explosion, as if the very fabric of space was being brutally torn apart. That sound wasn't just the clash of metal, it was the cry of a world shattering. And then, an unbelievable image appeared on TV screens, in the eyes looking up at the sky. And in the minds of millions, a massive commercial airliner, American Airlines Flight 11, had just crashed directly into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, between the 93rd and 99th floors. Try to imagine you are standing on a street in Manhattan at that moment. You're on your way to the office, perhaps thinking about an upcoming meeting or lunch with colleagues. Suddenly, you hear that sound, a horrific roar, unlike any noise you've ever heard before, like thunder from hell. You look up and see a giant gash in the side of the towering skyscraper. Black smoke coiling like a venomous snake slithering into the sky, and debris, glass, metal, paper falling like a strange, glittering rain in the sunlight. What is your first reaction? Not immediate fear, but profound confusion. The human mind, when faced with something so irrational, so far outside the framework of the world it knows, tries to find a logical explanation. An accident? A small plane lost in a technical glitch? A pilot suffering a sudden heart attack? Or just some terrible human error? Those questions flash through your mind, a desperate attempt to understand, to force the truth into an acceptable narrative, to keep your world from falling apart. You stand there with thousands of others on the street, gazing up, trying to process what is happening. Pedestrians stop mid-stride. Drivers stick their heads out of car windows, and the entire city seems to hold its breath in a momentary silence. Thousands pour onto the streets from nearby buildings, from coffee shops, looking up at the column of black smoke beginning to billow from the massive scar on the tower. Television cameras from around the world turn towards it, capturing every moment with cold precision. New York City, America, and eventually the entire world. We're witnessing a tragedy together, a horrific accident, unprecedented in modern history. TV news bulletins began to broadcast hurried announcements, the voices of anchors trembling as they tried to remain calm while describing what was happening. A plane crash, they said. An unprecedented disaster. They repeated the initial details. The plane departed from Boston, bound for Los Angeles, but had mysteriously gone off course. But then, just 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., the world we knew shattered irrevocably. A second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, appeared in the sky. There was no longer room for confusion. This was not a random accident. The plane banked deliberately, like an arrow aimed straight for its target, slammed into the South Tower between the 77th and 85th floors. A brilliant orange fireball erupted, tearing through the perfect blue sky like an unhealable gash on the day's canvas. The sound of the impact, though miles away, seemed to echo in the chests of those watching, shaking the very air. Screams erupted from the crowd, cries of sheer terror, and then a horrifying silence fell, as if the entire world was trying to absorb the shock. That moment, broadcast live to billions across the planet, was the moment time stopped. From living rooms in London to cafes in Paris, from homes in Tokyo to villages in Africa, everyone witnessed the same scene. It was then that we all realized this was not a single accident. This was an organized attack, an act of terrorism aimed at the symbol of American economic power. And in that moment, the 21st century truly began, with all the chaos and uncertainty it would bring. What followed was no longer a sequence of events. It was a living nightmare, a stream of images seared into our collective memory. Those images were not just clips on TV, they were cuts into the soul, moments you could not forget, no matter where you were in the world, no matter who you were. Smoke, enormous thick columns of black smoke, billowing from the two scars on the New York skyline, as if the earth itself was bleeding black tar. The smoke rose high, spread wide, obscuring the sun, turning the day into something like a gloomy twilight, with the acrid smell of burning metal and fuel. Fire, blazing orange-red flames burning hundreds of meters in the air, a horrific contrast to the cloudless blue sky. The fire raged, consuming floors as if wanting to incinerate the futures of those trapped inside. And the paper. Millions of pieces of office paper flew out from the two towers, glittering in the sun, falling like confetti in a funeral parade. Documents, contracts, notes, the fragments of a normal world now torn apart. They floated in the air like reminders that just minutes before, these towers were the workplace of thousands of people. With dreams, plans, and everyday stories, from conversations by the coffee machine to emails sent to family. But among all those images, there is one that our minds often try to push away, one too painful to face directly. The image of the people trapped on the upper floors, above the uncontrollable fire. They stood at the broken windows, waving in desperation, searching for a glimmer of hope in a sky that was no longer safe. Some held up white cloths, signs, hastily written pleas for help in pencil or lipstick. And then, some of them made an unimaginable choice. A choice between two deaths: being burned alive in the fire or falling from a terrifying height. And they jumped, one by one, like lonely silhouettes against the open air. Each figure that fell in that silence was a universe of stories. Unfinished loves, unfulfilled dreams, hopes extinguished in a matter of seconds. They had plans for the weekend, dreams for the future, words left unsaid to their loved ones. And in that moment, all they had was an unsafe sky and a choice no one should ever have to face. A choice that made witnesses on the ground turn away in agony. And then, at 9:59 a.m., the impossible happened, devastatingly. The South Tower collapsed. It's not an outward explosion, not a gradual leaning like an old tree. It collapsed into itself, floor by floor, pancaking in an unstoppable chain reaction with a deafening roar like thunder. 110 floors of steel and concrete turned into a massive cloud of dust, covering all of lower Manhattan in just 10 short seconds. That dust cloud was so thick, it turned day into blackest night, forcing those fleeing on the streets to grope in the dark, breathing air thick with dust and ash, coughing and lost. 29 minutes later, at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower followed, collapsing in the same horrific manner. Another symbol of America's strength and prosperity vanished, as if it had never existed on the map. What were once symbols of the American dream skyscrapers were thousands, from financiers to cleaning staff. Work to build the future was now just a pile of rubble. A giant scar on the ground, with the smell of smoke and burning metal lingering for weeks. Americans and the world didn't just witness an attack. They witnessed the safe world they had known. The world of dreams and invincibility turned to smoke and dust before their very eyes. In homes across the planet, from small apartments in Tokyo where families were having breakfast, to villages in Africa where farmers were working in the fields, people sat before their TVs, unable to look away, unable to believe what they were seeing. A loss that belonged not just to America but to all of humanity, a reminder of the fragility of peace. Do you remember your first memory of that day? Perhaps it was an image on TV you can never forget, the billowing black smoke, the exploding fireball, or the silhouettes falling in painful silence. Maybe it was a frantic phone call from a loved one, their voice trembling as they tried to recount what they had just seen from their office window or from the street. Or maybe it was the unusual silence in your city, as all flights were suddenly canceled, and the sky, for the first time in your life, became empty, with no engine sounds echoing, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Maybe you remember the look in your parents' eyes, unable to explain what was happening, but still trying to stay calm to shield you from the fear they themselves felt deep inside. Share that memory in the comments. It's not just a personal memory. It is part of a larger story, a story of all humanity, a story of loss, of resilience, and of what we learn when faced with the unimaginable things that change us forever. The two towers had fallen. That is an undeniable fact. But there was a third tower, one that few people know about, that also collapsed that day. And the way it fell has become one of the greatest mysteries, one of the most controversial questions of September 11th. In the next part, we will talk about the tower that shouldn't have collapsed, and delve into the technical details that have made many people think again. The buildings that fell, and the one that shouldn't have. In the last part, we relived the horrific morning when time seemed to stop completely. We saw two planes, two giant scars on the New York sky, and then two towers, symbols of America's strength and pride, crumble into dust in less than 2 hours. Those images, like sharp, cold knives, cut into our minds, leaving scars that will never heal, and forcing us to think about the fragility of human constructions, an event etched into human history. An image seared into the consciousness of an entire planet from one generation to the next. But in the ashes of that day, there are questions that still smolder, relentlessly nagging. The pieces of the truth don't seem to fit the official story we were told by government reports. These questions are not vague whispers in the dark corners of online forums. They are loud echoes, echoes that have caused thousands of architects, engineers, scientists, and truth seekers to stop and ask, what really happened? Were we told the whole story? Or just a part of it, the part that is easiest to accept? Tonight, we will not focus on the question of who did it, though that is a highly contentious topic. We will ask a different question, a question of physics, of engineering, of the immutable laws of the natural world. How could those steel giants collapse so perfectly? How could structures designed to withstand hurricanes, earthquakes, and even the impact of large airplanes vanish in an instant as if they had never existed on Earth? Let's start with the official story so we have a basis for comparison. The report by the 9/11 Commission and the National Institute of Standards and Technology provides a clear explanation based on scientific analysis. The impact of the airplane severely damaged the main load-bearing columns of the two towers, severing many key structures. But the direct cause of the collapse was not the initial impact. It was the fire. Thousands of gallons of jet fuel ignited, creating extreme temperatures reaching thousands of degrees Celsius in some spots, weakening the steel structure of the affected floors. When steel is heated, it doesn't need to melt completely, it just needs to soften, losing about 50 to 60% of its load-bearing capacity, which is enough to cause the entire structure above to collapse, creating a massive impact force. Imagine a steel skeleton, like the frame of a giant body, designed by top engineers. When heated to a certain temperature, it becomes malleable, like an iron bar in a blacksmith's forge. And when the top floors, already weakened by impact and fire, could no longer bear their own weight, they began to fall. Bad. That impact force crushed the floor below, and then the one below that, creating a pancake theory effect, an unstoppable chain reaction that turned 110 floors of steel and concrete into a pile of rubble in a matter of seconds. The massive steel columns, designed to support tens of thousands of tons, seemingly could not resist the force of gravity once the collapse process began. The NIST report emphasizes that this was the result of a combination of mechanical impact and prolonged fire. It's a plausible explanation, supported by computer simulations and experiments. It follows basic laws of physics like the conservation of energy and momentum. It gives us a story with a beginning and an end, a resolution to the incomprehensible chaos of that day. It tells us that, however catastrophic what happened, can be explained by science, by principles we can understand, and perhaps prevent in the future. But if you are a curious person, one who isn't afraid to ask uncomfortable questions, you might start noticing details that seem off. Details that don't quite fit the official narrative. Details pointed out by independent experts in hundreds of papers and reports. Details that make you stop and wonder. Was it really that simple? Did we miss something more important? Something left unsaid for political or other reasons? Strange detail 1. The speed of collapse. The two towers fell at a speed approaching free fall. The south tower collapsed in about 11 seconds. The north tower in about 22 seconds. To give you a mental picture, let's do a thought experiment. Imagine you are standing on the roof of a 110-story building, about 415 meters high, and you drop a bowling ball. Ignoring air resistance, that ball would take about 9.2 seconds to hit the ground, according to the basic physics formula. S equals gt, where g is the acceleration due to gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared. That is free fall speed, the speed of an object falling without any resistance. Now, think of the two towers' enormous structures with hundreds of thousands of tons of steel and concrete, designed with a central core and an outer frame to withstand the strongest storms and even airplane impacts. They collapsed at a speed that met almost no resistance from the floors below. The pancake theory requires each floor to take a little time to destroy the next one, a process that involves resistance. Time for steel columns to buckle, break, and give way. But it seemed as though the entire load-bearing structure of the building was eliminated almost simultaneously. Why was there no significant resistance from the 80 to 90 floors below? Where did tens of thousands of tons of steel go in the moment of collapse? How could massive steel columns, anchored deep in reinforced concrete foundations, be destroyed so uniformly and quickly? Many engineers argue this could only happen with the assistance of explosives or other factors. Strange detail 2, the pulverization into dust. Look back at those images, the footage replayed on TV for months afterward. They didn't just break into large concrete chunks or twisted steel sections like in typical building collapses. They were pulverized into a massive cloud of dust that covered all of lower Manhattan, turning day into night, making the air so thick it was unbreathable. Survivors recounted having to cover their mouths with their shirts with cloths, trying to breathe in a dust cloud as thick as a toxic fog, with superfine particles suspended for hours. Could a normal gravitational collapse produce dust? Yes. But could it produce such a colossal amount of superfine dust? To pulverize hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete and steel into dust requires an amount of energy far exceeding the potential energy provided by gravity, according to physics calculations. Where did that extra energy come from? From secondary explosions or from another source? How could a natural collapse process create a dust cloud so dense it enveloped an entire city, as if both towers had been turned into powder in midair, with dust particles spread so widely they affected the health of thousands for years to come? Strange detail 3, the streams of molten metal. For weeks, even months after the collapse, rescue and cleanup crews at Ground Zero repeatedly reported finding rivers of molten metal, like lava from a volcano flowing beneath the rubble. Images from the scene show glowing red masses of steel, as if they had just been removed from an industrial furnace. The temperature of burning jet fuel under ideal conditions can reach about 1,100 degrees Celsius, while office fires typically burn at around 600–800 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, the melting point of structural steel, the type used in the towers, is around 1,500 degrees Celsius. Most physicists and engineers agree that a typical office fire, even fueled by jet fuel, could not generate a temperature high enough and sustained long enough to melt a large amount of the steel structure, especially when the fire was not burning evenly everywhere. So, what created those rivers of molten metal? How could the temperature at ground zero reach such levels? And why was the metal still molten weeks after the attack, even under layers of dust and firefighting water? These questions, though based on fundamental scientific principles and supported by groups like architects and engineers for 9/11's truth, are often dismissed and labeled as part of conspiracy theories. But they are not questions that are easily ignored. They are questions that have led thousands of architects, engineers, and scientists around the world to reconsider what they were told, and even sign petitions demanding an independent investigation. And then we come to the third tower. It's the tower that few people know about, yet is at the center of the most persistent mysteries of 9/11's. World Trade Center Building 7. Imagine you are a professional architect or structural engineer. I show you a video. In the video, a 47-story skyscraper built with a sturdy steel frame suddenly collapses. It doesn't lean, it doesn't topple to one side as in typical fires. It collapses perfectly, symmetrically, straight down into its own footprint. At freefall speed for the first few seconds, the entire process takes less than 7 seconds, like a professionally demolished building. I ask you, what caused this collapse? With your expertise, you would probably answer immediately, without hesitation. That was a controlled demolition. The load-bearing columns on the lower floors were clearly removed simultaneously with explosives. There is no way a steel frame building could collapse like this due to fire alone, because it requires perfect synchronization. And then I tell you, no. According to the official report, this building collapsed solely due to ordinary office fires with no airplane impact. Would you believe it? That is the story of WTC-7. This building was not hit by any plane. It was located about a football field away from the North Tower, was damaged by debris from the Twin Towers, and had a few small fires on several floors, mostly involving paper and office furniture. But at 5:20 p.m. that day, WTC-7 collapsed in a way that no steel-frame skyscraper in history had ever collapsed before or since. From fire alone, without any clear warning signs like buckling or gradual leaning. This event was so strange that some news channels, like the BBC, reported the collapse of WTC-7 about 20 minutes before it actually happened. An unbelievable mistake, or a script that was leaked due to a technical error? The BBC footage shows reporter Jane Stanley reporting on WTC-7's collapse, while the building is still standing tall behind her, clearly visible in the live shot. A simple mistake, or a clue to a pre-known plan. For years, the 9/11's Commission did not even mention the collapse of WTC-7 in its official report, as if it didn't exist. It wasn't until 2008 that NIST released a final report, concluding that ordinary fires caused an unusual thermal expansion in some steel columns, leading to a chain reaction collapse of the entire structure. But this explanation failed to convince thousands of architects and engineers worldwide who have signed a petition demanding a new, independent, and more transparent investigation with real physical models instead of just computer simulations. Tonight, we are not here to give a definitive answer. We're not here to declare it was a conspiracy. We're here only to do what a free mind should do. Ask questions and encourage you to think deeper. When you watch the footage of WTC-7's collapse, a perfect, symmetrical collapse as if designed by a team of demolition experts with hundreds of bombs, what do you really see? A tragic and unprecedented fire incident unique in engineering history? Or something else, something staged with cold precision? What does your intuition tell you when reason seems to run out of answers? Do you believe that every question has a logical answer? Or are there truths so horrifying that they will forever be hidden in a fog of silence? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe will show that you are also someone who is not afraid to face difficult questions, not afraid to look directly into the dark corners of history. The towers were just steel and glass. Their collapse is a puzzle of physics. But inside those towers were souls, stories, goodbyes that were never said. In the next part, we will set aside the puzzles of physics to listen to the voices that never made it home and discover their power. The voices that never made it home. In the previous part, we stood in the middle of a giant puzzle of steel and concrete. We asked questions about the speed of the fall, about molten metal, and about a third tower that collapsed in strange silence. Questions of physics, of engineering, of mysteries that may never find a complete answer. Those questions, as important as they are sometimes how we unconsciously protect ourselves from a truth that is far more painful. The towers were not just steel. Inside them were people, lives, stories, dreams left unfulfilled, and words of love left unsaid, things that only become crystal clear in the final moments. Tonight, we will temporarily set aside the puzzles of physics and engineering. We will not seek the truth in 100-page reports or complex calculations on paper. The echoes sent from the middle of the sky, from within the clouds of smoke. Through a fragile thread of connection called the telephone. Those words, though brief, though broken by noise and panic, contain an entire universe of emotion, of courage, and of love. They are the last fragments of people facing death, yet still trying to reach their loved ones, just one last time, as a final effort to leave their mark. Some calls were never heard. Some goodbyes were whispered into silence. Those words are not just speech. They're a legacy, a lesson about human nature. Join me and let us listen with respect. Imagine you are on United Airlines Flight 93, the flight from Newark to San Francisco. You know something is wrong when the plane suddenly changes direction. The plane has been hijacked by men with knives and fake bombs. The passengers around you are panicking. Some are screaming, some are praying silently, some sit in shock, trying to understand what is happening from smuggled news. You hear shouts from the front, the cold commands of the hijackers in Arabic. Through rushed calls home on the planes, airplanes, you and the others on the flight receive horrific news. Other planes have crashed into the World Trade Center, causing a catastrophe. Your flight, Flight 93, is also a flying bomb. Heading for another target, perhaps the White House in Washington, D.C., perhaps the Capitol, where hundreds are working. You know you are not going home. There is no chance for a happy ending. In that moment, facing certain death, what would you do? Who would you call, and what would you say? Perhaps you would think of the things left unsaid, the apologies left hanging for petty arguments, the dreams you promised to fulfill with your loved one, like a family trip or a new house. Perhaps you would try to say "I love you," knowing it might be the last time, so they could carry that memory with them. Perhaps you would try to find a way to make your final moments meaningful. Not just for you, but for the world, so that your death would not be in vain. A man named Todd Beamer, a 32-year-old account manager, tried to call his wife Lisa, but couldn't connect due to a weak signal. Instead, he spoke with an operator, Lisa Jefferson, via the plane's satellite phone. With astonishing calm, he told her what was happening. The number of hijackers, their weapons, the panic among the passengers. He described the situation on the plane, the passengers' terror, and the hijackers controlling the cockpit with a suicide plan. He asked her to pass a message to his pregnant wife that he loved her, that he wanted her to know he was always with her, no matter what happened, and to take care of their children. He told her about their unborn child, about the dreams he had for his family, like weekend afternoons playing ball with his son. And then he and the other passengers on Flight 93 made an unimaginable decision. They would not let the hijackers achieve their goal. They would fight back, even with just their bare hands and their unity. The last words Lisa Jefferson heard from Todd Beamer were not a tearful goodbye. They were a rallying cry, a courageous call to action. He turned to those around him, strangers who now shared a common fate, and asked, "Are you guys ready?" And then he said, "Let's roll." Those words, simple yet powerful, became a symbol of courage, of defiance in the face of fate. They fought with all the strength they had, knowing there was no chance of survival, using a food cart and boiling water as weapons. Flight 93 never reached its hijacker's target. It crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, hundreds of miles from Washington, D.C., creating a deep crater in the earth. Their actions saved countless lives in the capital. But the price was that everyone on that flight, 40 passengers and crew, sacrificed their lives. Or imagine you are Melissa Harrington Hughes, a 31-year-old woman on her way to a business meeting in California. You are trapped in the North Tower, above the fire on the 106th floor. Thick black smoke surrounds you. The air is hot and suffocating, making it hard to breathe. You know there is no escape. The elevators are broken. The stairs are blocked by fire. You call your father, your voice filled with panic but still trying to leave one last message. Dad, I just want you to know I love you. I'm trapped. I don't know what's going to happen. Tell Mom and my husband I love them. In her trembling voice was a world of fear, but also of love. A final effort to send a message to her loved ones, to ensure they knew how much they meant to her. Even if she couldn't hug them one last time. Or you are Brian Sweeney, a 38-year-old former Navy pilot on United Flight 175, second plane to hit the South Tower. You leave a voicemail for your wife, Julie. His voice isn't trembling, not panicked. It is calm, gentle, and full of love, as if you were making a routine call. He says, Jules, this is Brian. Listen, I'm on a plane that has been hijacked. I just want you to know that I love you very much. I want you to live a good life, be good to people, and have happy days. See you when you get here. In those words, there is no resentment, no despair. Only love, an intense and pure love, as if he wanted to use his final moments to ensure his wife would carry his love with her for the rest of her life and live a meaningful one. Each of those calls is a universe of emotion, the fear of an inevitable death, the courage to remain calm, and above all, love. An intense love, rising in the final moments, trying to reach across distance. Through fire and smoke, to touch a loved one one last time. The words of love left unsaid in daily life. The apologies that never arrived for small misunderstandings. The messages left unfinished about the future. How many messages were sent, but never read because the network crashed? How many calls were made only to be met by the beep of an answering machine? And how many goodbyes were never spoken, only whispered into the silence, in the final moments as a person faced death alone, among strangers? At an altitude of 10,000 meters or in the smoke-filled corridors of a tower with final thoughts of family. These stories are not cold statistics and reports. They are the deepest lessons about human nature. That when faced with the end, when everything else is stripped away, money, status, the future, the only thing that remains, the only thing that truly matters is our connection to others. It is a simple but sincere, I love you. It is a dad, I'm proud of you. It is alive, a good life. Those words, though brief, though cut short by smoke and fire, have become immortal. Ink their small flames, burning forever in the memories of those left behind, inspiring books, films, and memorials. If tonight you had only one last call to make, who would you call? And more importantly, what would you say to them? Would it be an apology you've held in your heart for too long because of pride? A thank you that you never said because you took it for granted, or simply an I love you, to make sure they know how much they mean to you? Perhaps we shouldn't wait for such a tragic moment to say the most important things. Perhaps the greatest lesson these voices leave us is to live each day, as if it were your last chance to say you love someone, to right your wrongs, to hug your loved ones, and tell them how much they matter before it's too late. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe is a way for us to remember and honor these people together, those who are gone, but whose voices still echo, reminding us of the value of love and courage in the most desperate of times. They are gone. Those voices have faded, but their echo has not. It has become part of a larger memory, a scar that will never heal in the soul of a nation, of a generation. In the next part, we will talk about a memory that never ended and how it shaped the world we live in today. The memory that didn't end. In the last part, we listened to the final goodbyes, the voices sent from the middle of the sky, from within the clouds of smoke. Words of love, final messages, the last fragments of humanity before everything fell into silence. They are gone. Those voices have faded, but their echo has not, and it continues to ripple through time. Because as one writer said, trauma doesn't always bleed. Sometimes it just smolders. We will no longer talk about what happened on the morning of September 11th. We will talk about what never ended after. We will talk about an invisible wound, a memory that no longer belongs to any one person, but has become the legacy of an entire generation, of an entire planet, affecting every aspect of modern life. Think about the concept of flashbulb memory. It's a psychological term for memories that are seared into our brains with extraordinary clarity and emotion because they are tied to a shocking event on a personal or communal level. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963, with the image of the motorcade in Dallas, the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986, and for billions around the world, September 11, 2001. These moments aren't just memories. They are landmarks, dividing lines between a world before and a world after, changing how we perceive safety and the world. Let's try a small mental experiment. You remember what you ate for lunch on September 10th, 2001? Probably not. The ordinary details of life are often forgotten, fading into the flow of time like any other meal. But do you remember where you were, what you were doing, and how you felt when you heard the news of the attack? I bet you do, very clearly, in great detail. It's as if that moment was captured by a powerful flash, freezing it forever in your mind. Perhaps you remember the look in the eyes of the person sitting next to you on the couch, the trembling voice of the news anchor on TV, or the cold chill that ran down your spine as you realized the world had changed forever, with fear spreading. That memory is not just a static photograph, it is a dividing line. There is a world of before 9/11s, and there is a world of after 9/11s. Do you feel that change? The feeling that our world lost a bit of its innocence, a bit of its sense of security on that day? The world of the 90s, the world before, was one filled with optimism. The Cold War had ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Berlin Wall had fallen in 1989, ushering in an era of globalization. Theorists like Francis Fukuyama spoke of the end of history as if humanity were entering a new era of peace, prosperity, and globalization. The internet was booming, the economy was growing with the dot-com bubble, and it seemed the world was becoming a better place, with trade agreements and cultural integration. September 11th shattered that illusion brutally. It reminded us that history had never ended, that violence, hatred, and the deep fissures of the world were always there, just waiting for an opportunity to rise from the shadows. It planted in our psyche a permanent sense of unease, a fear that no longer came from a clear enemy with tanks and armies, but from things that were invisible, intangible. A suitcase left unattended at an airport could be a bomb. A man who looks different could be a threat. A plane flying too low could be a sign. Small things, once harmless in daily life, now carry a new meaning, a potential threat, keeping us on constant alert. The shadow of the two towers has cast itself over every corner of society, reshaping it permanently. It created a form of collective post-traumatic stress disorder, not just for those who directly witnessed the attack, but for all of us those who sat in front of our TV screens, watching those horrific images over and over again. Hundreds, thousands of times in looping news reports. Those images were not just news. They were a wound carved into the mind, replaying every time we see a plane in the sky, every time we hear a loud bang from a construction site, every time we think about the fragility of life and how it can change in an instant. PTSD doesn't just belong to the firefighters who breathed the toxic dust at Ground Zero, leading to chronic respiratory illnesses, or the survivors who ran out of the towers with physical and mental scars. It belongs to those thousands of miles away who felt their world shake, even if they were not near New York, like families in Europe or Asia. It belongs to the children who grew up in a world where terrorism was no longer a distant word in history books, but a part of daily reality, with security drills at school. Children who learned to have their backpacks checked before entering school, who grew accustomed to seeing armed guards at airports, who grew up with the knowledge that the world was no longer as safe as it once was, with stories from their parents about the day everything changed. Look at the tangible legacies of 9/11s. Airport security, now a familiar yet tedious and time-consuming ritual. Do you remember a time when you could walk straight to the gate to see off a loved one? Without going through scanners or taking off your shoes and belt? Now, we stand in long lines, dispose of water bottles, pass through full-body scanners, and accept that this is the price of safety, with regulations from the TSA established shortly after. But this ritual, however familiar, was born from the fires of that day. Every time you take off your shoes at an airport, every time you are subjected to a random bag check, you are living in the shadow of 9/11s, a legacy of fear. Look at the political legacies. Patriot Act, hastily passed just weeks after the attack, granted the U.S. government unprecedented surveillance powers over its citizens, such as monitoring phone calls and emails without a warrant. The 20-year war in Afghanistan, the longest in American history, began in October 2001 to hunt down al-Qaeda. The war in Iraq in 2003, based on claims of weapons of mass destruction that were later proven false. The entire geopolitical map of the 21st century was redrawn, with 9/11s as the starting point, the trigger for decades-long conflicts that claimed millions of lives in the Middle East and changed the fates of millions more, from refugees to soldiers. And there is an invisible, yet perhaps most painful legacy: the rise of Islamophobia. The fear and anger of an entire nation were exploited by some, simplified and placed on the shoulders of millions of innocent people, simply because they shared a faith or cultural background with the terrorists. Suspicion replaced understanding. Walls were built, not of brick and mortar, but of prejudice and fear. Communities were marginalized. Suspicious glances were cast in public places. Attacks were made on innocent people, all are other scars of that day, leading to prolonged social polarization. That is why there is a saying that is very true. We don't live post 9/11s, we still live in it. We're still breathing the air created from that dust cloud. We're still walking on a path shaped by the seismic crack of that day. How has 9/11s changed your life? No matter where you are in the world. Do you see the world differently after that day? Is there a new fear that has crept into your mind, or was a new empathy born from the ashes of that day? Like the initial global solidarity? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe will help us continue this important dialogue, so we do not forget what happened, and so we can learn to live better from it. We live in the legacy of 9/11s. We feel its scar every day. But do we truly understand it? Are we just living in a house built on a foundation of questions that were never fully answered? In the next part, we will confront the silence and the secrets that still remain. The wound that whispers and the light that stayed. In the previous part, we stood in a void of silence, a void filled with unanswered questions and conspiracy theories born from that very silence. We delved into the details, the doubts, the gaps in the official narrative, and perhaps we felt a bit lost in the darkness of those mysteries. A long and dark journey, full of nagging questions. Perhaps after going through all that, we might think that the only legacy of September 11th is darkness, is fear, is unending loss and suspicion. But that is not the whole story. Because no matter how great the darkness, humans always find a way to create light. Because there are wounds that will always whisper, but so does hope. Tonight, in the final part of our journey, we will no longer look at what collapsed. We will look at what remained, what rose from the ashes. We will search for the light. Guess when the smoke cleared, what was left was not just ash and loss. What was left was the human spirit, was courage, was love, and the resilience of humanity in the face of adversity. Let's go back to that horrific morning, to the moment the first tower was hit. The instinctive reaction of thousands of people was to run. Run out of the building, run from the danger, run to save their own lives, amidst the chaotic crowd on the streets. It is a completely natural reaction, a survival instinct ingrained in each of us since ancient times. When smoke and fire billow, when debris falls like a deadly rain, fleeing is what anyone would do to protect themselves and their families. But there was a group of people who ran in the opposite direction, against all risks. They were the firefighters of the New York City Fire Department, the police officers, the emergency medical technicians. They did not have modern weapons. They did not have bulletproof vests. Their only weapons were courage and an unwavering sense of duty forged through years of serving the community. They ran inside, against the tide of the panicked fleeing crowd, straight into the heart of the fire and darkness, with heavy equipment on their backs. They knew they might never come back out, as the tower was shaking, but they went anyway. They climbed the smoke-filled stairs, carrying oxygen tanks and rescue tools, trying to save those trapped on the upper floors, even as each step brought them closer to death, with evacuation orders echoing on their radios. They were not superheroes from Hollywood movies, with extraordinary powers or flashy lines. They were ordinary people from all walks of life. Fathers, husbands, brothers. That morning, they too had their morning coffee, kissed their wives and children goodbye before work, never knowing it would be the last time, with promises like, "I'll be home for dinner." They had dreams, plans, and everyday stories just like you and me, from home repairs to retirement plans. But when the fateful moment came, they made a choice without hesitation, to put the lives of others above their own, embodying the spirit of one for all. 343 firefighters never returned, including their chaplain, Father Michael Judge, who prayed for the victims until his final moment. 60 police officers, 8 paramedics. They were not victims of a random attack. They were the ones who chose to face it with all the courage a human being can possess. They were the first, brightest light in the darkness of that day, and their stories are told in museums and documentaries. And that light did not only come from those in uniform, it came from ordinary citizens who acted without orders, without seeking recognition, simply out of kindness. Think of the story of the boats on the Hudson River. When the bridges and tunnels into lower Manhattan were closed for security, the area became an isolated island amidst the smoke and dust. Hundreds of thousands were trapped, with no way to escape the cloud of dust and chaos, with ambulance sirens wailing. And then, a great evacuation took place, not organized from the top down by the military or government, but spontaneously by ordinary people. The captains of ferries, tour boats, private fishing boats, and even luxury yachts. They all turned their vessels around, headed straight into the thick dust cloud, and began ferrying strangers to safety in New Jersey or Brooklyn. They didn't ask for names, didn't ask for reasons, didn't ask for any reward. They just did what needed to be done, with simple words of encouragement like, "Get on, we'll be safe." In 9 hours, nearly 500,000 people were evacuated by sea evacuation larger than the one at Dunkirk in World War II in 1940, carried out by unsung heroes, from fishermen to wealthy boat owners. In the darkest moments, human kindness seems to shine the brightest. It was the people who opened their homes to strangers, sharing water, food, and a temporary shelter. It was the volunteers who worked tirelessly at Ground Zero. Despite the toxic dust and the risk of further collapse, digging by hand to search for survivors. It was the people who lined up for blocks to donate blood at hospitals, even though painfully, very few survivors needed it. But the act itself was a testament to solidarity. And that light did not just last for one day, continued to smolder and was passed on to the next generation. Think of the children born from the ashes, children whose fathers, the firefighters, the police officers, died that day while they were still in their mother's wombs. Many of them, as they grew up, what path did they choose? They chose to wear the same uniform their fathers wore on the last day of their lives, despite knowing the risks. They chose to become firefighters, paramedics, protectors of the community, not out of hatred or a desire for revenge, but to continue a legacy of service, to turn their personal loss into a gift for the world, as a way to honor the fathers they never met. And every year on September 11th, special ritual takes place in New York as night falls. 2 giant beams of blue light are projected straight into the sky from the very spot where the 2 towers once stood. It is called the Tribute in Light, not a cold stone monument, not a permanent structure. It is a monument of light, a reminder that though the physical towers may fall, their spirit, the memory of them, and the light they represent of hope and strength will never be extinguished. That light attracts migrating birds and tourists, symbolizing that life goes on. It is a way of saying to the sky, we are still here, still remember. And we will not let the darkness win, no matter how hard it tries. And so, our journey, which began with a scar in memory, has come to an end. And perhaps the final lesson that September 11th leaves us is not about the fragility of towers or human constructions, but about the resilience of the human spirit. It teaches us that even in the rubble, there is the courage to stand up. Even in the deepest darkness, there is the light of kindness. And even in the most profound loss, there is love to heal. There are wounds that will never fully heal. They will always whisper, reminding us of the price of life, of the fragility of what we hold dear, and of the importance of cherishing every moment. And perhaps the most important thing is not to try to force them to heal, but to learn to listen to them. To listen to what they teach us about life, about loss, and about the power of choosing hope, even when all seems lost, to build a better world. What light has helped you through the darkest times in your life? Is it the kindness of a stranger in a difficult time? The love of family in a storm? Or a spark of hope from within you, from your personal faith? Share your story of light in the comments. Thank you for bravely walking with me through one of the most painful memories of our generation. If this story touched you, please share it, not to spread sadness, but to spread empathy, courage, and hope for the next generation. And please subscribe to the channel so we can continue together on future nights of reflection. Exploring more stories from history. The night is late, the darkness will pass. Sleep well. With dreams lit by a fire that never dies, the fire of hope and the human spirit. The questions that never got answered. In the previous part, we talked about memory, about how a single morning became a scar that never healed in the soul of a generation. We saw the long shadow of the two towers fall, reshaping everything from how we fly on planes to how we see our neighbors. We have lived in the legacy of 9/11s, but do we truly understand it? Or are we just living in a house built on a foundation of questions that were never fully answered, of voids that leave the mind relentlessly tormented? Tonight, we will step into that void. The void of silence, of sealed files, of questions that have persisted for over 2 decades. Answered by no one, but forgotten by no one. And perhaps, as someone once said, the real conspiracy is the silence, because it allows suspicion to grow unchallenged. Let's start with the biggest question, the one that has haunted the victims' families, independent investigators, and millions around the world for over 20 years. Why? Why could an attack of such scale and complexity happen right on American soil, with seemingly no clear warning from security agencies? How could a sophisticated plan requiring the coordination of 19 hijackers for airplanes and years of preparation from caves in Afghanistan unfold right under the noses of the world's top intelligence agencies like the CIA and FBI? The official answer is, it was an intelligence failure to connect the dots. Agencies like the CIA, FBI, and NSA all had pieces of the puzzle, but they failed to share them effectively due to bureaucratic barriers. Bureaucratic walls, lack of coordination between departments, and human error led to a preventable disaster. It is an understandable story of incompetence, of imperfect systems in a large government. But when you dig a little deeper, through declassified documents and testimony, the simplicity of that story begins to fade, and more disturbing questions arise, making many wonder if it was just incompetence or something else. There were dots that didn't need to be connected. There were already blazing red warning lights, yet they seem to have been systematically ignored. In July 2001, an FBI agent in Arizona named Kenneth Williams sent a memo, later known as the Phoenix Memo. He warned that an alarming number of extremists with ties to Osama bin Laden were attending flight schools in the U.S., learning to fly large aircraft. He recommended a nationwide investigation into these individuals due to their suspicious behavior. His warning was shelved and acted upon. No one asked why these men were interested in learning to fly commercial jets, but not in visas or jobs. No one questioned their intentions, though they were clearly unusual. In August 2001, just 1 month before the attack, Zacarias Musai, later dubbed the 20th hijacker, was arrested in Minnesota for an immigration violation. He had paid thousands of dollars in cash to learn to fly a Boeing 747 at a Pan Am flight school, but showed no interest in learning how to take off or land a behavior so strange that his flight instructors reported him to the FBI. Local agents recognized the danger immediately. They pleaded with their superiors in Washington for a warrant to search Musai's computer, which could have contained vital clues about the Al-Qaeda network. Their request was denied on legal grounds, despite clear evidence. No further action was taken to investigate, though the warning signs were too obvious to ignore. And later, his computer was found to contain information about the targets. And then, there was the presidential daily briefing of August 6, 2001. A top-secret document presented to President George W. Bush at his Texas ranch. Its title was clear and chilling: Bin Laden, determined to strike in us. The document warned of the possibility of hijackings and terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. It mentioned specific signs, such as terrorist groups casing federal buildings in New York and reports from British and French intelligence. Yet no specific action was taken to counter this threat. No public warning to airlines, no heightened security at airports, no effort to investigate further the dangers that had been clearly stated just weeks before the attacks. These stories are not conspiracy theories from unreliable sources. They are facts documented in the 9/11's Commission report itself, published in 2004. So the question is no longer did they know, but rather, what did they know? And why didn't they act more decisively? Was it incompetence on a historic scale, or something else? Something deeper, harder to say, like indifference or different priorities? The government's silence in the face of these questions has created a void. And in that void, the darkest theories have sprouted. Stories of cover-ups, of conspiracies, of behind-the-scenes forces that could benefit from the event, like military contractors. Stories that, while they may not be true, persist because silence is the best fuel for them. When there are no clear answers, the human mind will create its own, right or wrong, based on leaked documents. And the silence doesn't just cover what happened before 9/11's, it also covers what happened after. For years, 28 pages of the Joint Congressional Inquiry Report were kept completely classified under the pretext of national security. These pages were said to discuss the potential role of a U.S. ally, Saudi Arabia, in funding or supporting the hijackers, with links to royalty and intelligence. It wasn't until 2016 that these pages were partially declassified, but many documents, many files remain sealed and may never be made public in our lifetime, despite years of litigation by victims' families. Why are there so many secrets? If the story was simply 19 terrorists acting from a cave in Afghanistan, why the need for decades of silence? Why must the victims' families, who lost their loved ones, still fight for transparency from their own government, through lawsuits like the one against Saudi Arabia? When faced with a gap in the truth, what do you tend to do? Do you accept the authorities' silence, believing they have legitimate reasons to protect national security? Or do you start to feel a sense of unease, a suspicion, and begin to seek out other stories to fill that void, through books or documentaries? Silence, ironically, is the best fuel for conspiracy theories. It doesn't extinguish the fire of doubt. It just makes it smolder and spread further underground, in whispered conversations, in online forums, in books and films like Loose Change or 9/11's. The new Pearl Harbor. Because the human mind hates an unfinished story. We need closure. We need a full explanation. And when no official explanation is convincing enough, we will create one for ourselves. Maybe it's a story of bureaucratic incompetence. Maybe it's a story of a cover-up to protect an ally. Or maybe it's a story of a truth too horrifying to be made public, like the involvement of internal elements. For you, what is more frightening? A horrific truth being exposed, or a question that is forever left unanswered? And when you think about 9/11's, do you feel that we truly know the whole story, or just a curated part of it? Leave your thoughts in the comments. A like and subscribe will show that you also believe that asking questions is never wrong. Asking questions is how we keep the flame of truth alive, even if it's just a small spark in the darkness. In the darkness of unanswered questions, And in the pain of a memory that never ends, there are still sparks of light that were never extinguished. In the final part, we will talk about the wound that whispers and the light that remained to end our journey with hope.
You've crossed the story. You felt every pulse in the dark, and I was there with you, quietly, always. That's why I left behind one last thing. Not to explain, not to impress, just to stay with you a little longer. A song I chose with care, as if tucking you in from across time and space. So go on, lay back, the music knows where to take you. you're still here, then you're something rare. Not many stay this long. So, thank you for choosing to stay. I'm here too, still awake, surrounded by the quiet glow of my editing screen, shaping the next stories just for you. If there's anything you want to leave behind, a whisper, a suggestion, even just a symbol, drop it in the comments. Because maybe, tomorrow night, you'll hear yourself echoed in a story that's never been told before. still here, even now? I have a feeling part of you is still wandering somewhere between wakefulness and dreaming. I know that feeling well because I'm still awake with you. In a quiet room, I'm gently laying out layers of sound, each breath, each beat, preparing the next journey we'll take together. If you're still listening, leave me a sign. Let me know how you're feeling or just where you are in this vast world. Because right now, in this stillness, you are not alone. You're still there, aren't you? I can't see you, but I can feel you. Like a soft signal pulsing across the silence. Over here, I'm still working, refining layers of sound, rewriting fragments of voice, building the landscape for our next adventure. One that you might inspire. If an idea comes to you, share it with me. Comment below. A theme, a memory, a strange dream. I read every word because I never tell these stories alone. I tell them with you.